Welcome to the History of North America. I'm Mark Vinette. New France had been proclaimed a royal province under a new king in 1663. This new king understood that a military presence would be necessary to deter the Iroquois. Newly crowned, this young monarch already dreamed of creating a great empire, and he did not want to inaugurate his reign by losing his colony in the New World. He realized that New France would never prosper as long as it was treated as a purely commercial operation. Changes were made. The colony would now report directly to him and the royal administration through a governor and an intendant. Things would finally improve and change in New France under the energetic reign of King Louis XIV of France, the monarch that helped usher in the golden age of New France.
The old Régime in Canada, the colony and the king, 1661 to 1665, royal intervention. Leave Canada behind, cross the sea, and stand on an evening in June by the edge of the forest at Fontainebleau. Beyond the broad gardens, above the long ranges of moonlit trees, rise the walls and pinnacles of the vast chateau. A shrine of history, the gorgeous monument of lines of vanished kings, haunted with memories of Capet, Valois, and Bourbon. There was little thought of the past at Fontainebleau in June 1661. The present was too dazzling and too intoxicating, the future too radiant with hope and promise. It was the morning of a new reign. The sun of Louis XIV was rising in splendour, and the rank and beauty of France were gathered to pay it homage. A youthful court, a youthful king, a pomp and magnificence such as Europe had never seen, a delirium of ambition, pleasure, and love. All this wrought in many a young heart an enchantment destined to be cruelly broken. Even old courtiers felt the fascination of the scene, and tell us of the music at evening by the borders of the lake, of the gay groups that strolled under the shadowing trees, floated in gilded barges on the still water, or moved slowly in open carriages around its borders. Here was Anne of Austria, the king's mother, and Marie-Thérèse, his tender and jealous queen, his brother, the Duke of Orleans, with his bride of 16, Henriette of England, and his favourite, that vicious butterfly of the court, the Count de Quiche. Here too were the humbled chiefs of the Civil War, Beaufort and Condé, obsequious before their triumphant master Louis XIV, the centre of all eyes in the flush of health and vigour, and the pride of new-fledged royalty, stood as he still stands on the canvas of Philippe de Champagne, attired in a splendour which would have been effeminate but for the stately port of the youth who wore it. Fortune had been strangely bountiful to Louis XIV. The nations of France, exhausted by wars and dissensions, looked upon him with respect and fear. Among weak and weary neighbours, he alone was strong. The death of Mazarin had released him from tutelage. Feudalism in the person of Condé was abject before him. He had reduced his parliaments to submission, and in the arrest of the ambitious prodigal Fouquet, he was preparing a crushing blow to the financial corruption which had devoured France. Nature had formed him to act the part of king. Even his critics and enemies praised the grace and majesty of his presence, and he impressed his courtiers with an admiration which seems to have been to an astonishing degree genuine. He carried airs of royalty even into his pleasures, and while his example corrupted all France, he proceeded to the apartments of Montespan or Fontanges with the majestic gravity of Olympian Jove. He was a devout observer of the forms of religion, and as the buoyancy of youth passed away, his zeal was stimulated by a profound fear of the devil. Mazarin had reared him in ignorance, but his faculties were excellent in their way, and in a private station would have made him an efficient man of business. The vivacity of his passions and his inordinate love of pleasure were joined to a persistent will and a rare power of labour. The vigorous mediocrity of his understanding delighted in grappling with details. His astonished courtiers saw him take on himself the burden of administration and work at it without relenting for more than half a century. Great as was his energy, his pride was far greater. As king by divine right, he felt himself raised immeasurably above the highest of his subjects. But while vindicating with unparalleled haughtiness his claims to supreme authority, he was, at the outset, filled with a sense of the duties of his high place, and fired by an ambition to make his reign beneficent to France, as well as glorious to himself. Above all rulers of modern times, Louis XIV was the embodiment of the monarchical idea. The famous words ascribed to him, "I am the state," were probably never uttered, but they perfectly express his spirit. "It is God's will," he wrote in 1666, "that whoever is born a subject should not reason but obey," and those around him were of his mind. "The state is in the king," said Bossuet, the great mouthpiece of monarchy. "The will of the people is merged in his will. O kings, put forth your power boldly, for it is divine and salutary to humankind." For a few brief years, this king's reign was indeed salutary to France. His judgment of men, when not obscured by his pride and his passion for flattery, was good, and he had at his service the generals and statesmen formed in the freer and bolder epoch that had ended with his accession. Among them was Jean-Baptiste Colbert, formerly the intendant of Mazarin's household, a man whose energies matched his talents, and who had preserved his rectitude in the midst of corruption. It was a hard task that Colbert imposed upon his proud and violent nature to serve the imperious king, morbidly jealous of his authority and resolved to accept no initiative but his own. He must counsel while seeming to receive counsel, and lead while seeming to follow. The new minister bent himself to the task, and the nation reaped the profit. A vast system of reform was set in action amid the outcries of nobles, financiers, churchmen, and all who profited by abuses. The methods of this reform were trenchant and sometimes violent, and its principles were not always in accord with those of modern economic science. But the good that resulted was incalculable. The burdens of the labouring classes were lightened, the public revenues increased, and the wholesale plunder of the public money was arrested with a strong hand. Laws were reformed and codified. Feudal tyranny, which still subsisted in many quarters, was repressed. Agriculture and productive industry of all kinds were encouraged. Roads and canals opened. Trade was stimulated, a commercial marine created, and a powerful navy formed as if by magic. It is in his commercial, industrial, and colonial policy that the profound defects of the great minister's system are most apparent. It was a system of authority, monopoly, and exclusion, in which the government, and not the individual, acted always the foremost part. Upright, incorruptible, ardent for the public good, inflexible, arrogant, and domineering, he sought to drive France into paths of prosperity and create colonies by the energy of an imperial will. He feared, and with reason, that the want of enterprise and capital among the merchants would prevent the broad and immediate results at which he aimed, and to secure these results, he established a series of great trading corporations in which the principles of privilege and exclusion were pushed to their utmost limits. Prominent among them was the Company of the West. The king signed the edict creating it on the 24th of May 1664. Any person in the kingdom or out of it might become a partner by subscribing within a certain time not less than 3,000 francs. France was a mere patch on the map compared to the vast domains of the new association. Western Africa from Cape Verde to the Cape of Good Hope, South America between the Amazon and the Orinoco, Cayenne, the Antilles, and all New France, from Hudson's Bay to Virginia and Florida, were bestowed on it forever to be held of the crown in the simple condition of faith and homage.
I'm Mark Vinette, and I hope you're enjoying the ride.